Oh, thank you. Hello and welcome to the second episode of this here podcast. I'm Quinn Rolo. Happy to be back here with my buds, talk some baseball. We got a lot of things on tap to talk about. But before we get underway with some of these discussions, I'll kick it on over to Matty T.
Excellent. As the aforementioned leadoff hitter Quinn told me, my name is Matt. I'm hitting second. And unlike Rafael Devers, I have good protection behind me and Dave Greco.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, thank you, Matt. I'll tell you what. Usually, my game doesn't allow me to hit third unless it's a slow pitch softball situation. So
Mhm.
I appreciate the confidence in hitting, uh, in the power spot. But I'll tell you what, this week has been pretty damn powerful, as far as news goes, as far as everything that's been going around us lately. And obviously the big one, which kind of surprising how little it's been talked about and covered. But the big one is Mr. Rose. We
Yeah.
lost the hit king.
So, I mean, the first time I ever saw him, um, I was watching a game, I think a national game, and he was in the middle of a 44 game hit streak. Um, and that's third all time.
Mm.
I thought it was second, but it's third.
Wait, who is second?
A guy named Wee Willie Keeler
Mm.
Oh,
played in like the 1800s.
wow, that's some arcane baseball
Yeah.
trivia right there. I like that.
And DiMaggio was number one.
Right, of course.
So he was in the middle of that streak. And then he went to the Phillies after that. And, um, when I look at his numbers specifically, um, so he's number one in hits, and then Ty Cobb is number two. He has like 64 more hits than Ty Cobb. He has almost uh, he has almost 500 more hits than the third guy in the list, Hank Aaron. I mean, it's crazy, man. That's like almost 3 seasons. That's 3 seasons worth of hits.
And Rose played just under 20 years, right? It was like 19
Played like
seasons.
23 or 24, I think.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. He was in the big
Yeah.
leagues for that long. Oh, wow. Okay.
But if you look at 4,256 hits, that's 21 seasons of 200 hits. You know how many people had 200 hits in the major leagues this year? Two.
Mm.
One of them not Shohei Ohtani.
Right.
Oh, burn.
Yep.
Mhm.
And one of them, so Bobby Witt had 211. I saw in Arias, wherever he plays now, San Diego.
Yeah, he went to
He's
San
getting
Diego.
traded
Yep.
for some reason.
Yep.
He had 200 exactly.
Yep.
So it's 21 seasons of 200 hits. Staggering. Um, and I think he when I first watched him, he was playing third base. I watched him play first base. He won 2 Gold Gloves in the outfield. Um, he played second base when he first came up, so he's pretty much played everywhere. Um, and he's not known for his fielding, but he was always in the right place at the right time, making the right play. So I didn't like him as a guy, uh, but I really respected the way he played. He played the game, I would say the thing I recognized the most about him is an at bat he had against Nolan Ryan in the playoffs in 1980. I think Ryan threw him about 14 pitches, and
Ooh,
Ryan wound up walking him with the bases loaded. And I
wow.
think it tied the game or brought it within a run in like the ninth inning, and they had to take Ryan out after that. Um, it was an incredible at bat. And then the other thing I had somebody ask me about today was like the All Star game where he plowed into Ray Fosse,
Mhm.
Hmm.
and they asked me if I thought it was excessive, and I said, well, today it would be.
Yeah.
Oh, sure.
You know,
Everything's excessive today.
yeah, but when I was growing up, the All-Star game was a competitive game. It was very different. Do I think it was a little excessive even for back then? I don't know, maybe, but you know, he's in front of his home fans. It's an all-star game, and you know, the teams wanted to win the game now. It's not a dog and pony act like there is now. So that's what I remember about him the most. And he should be in the Hall of Fame. It's unquestionably that he should be in. I don't know why they can't separate his accomplishments as a player with the fact that he gambled as a manager.
Yep.
I don't know why they can't do that.
Yep. I agree with that 100%. Yeah. And I never get to see any games that he played in, you know, even as a player coach. You know, I never got to see him do that. I saw highlights, you know, I know why they called him Charlie Hustle. I thought his haircut was stupid and it drove me up a wall.
Yeah.
And you know, I don't necessarily think he was my favorite guy as far as personality goes from what I saw. Um, and you know, you bring up the Ray Fosse thing, and I look back at it, and not to foreshadow something we're going to be talking about, is you know my feelings on interleague play is the whole reason why the All-Star game means nothing now, right? And I think that back then it was a showcase. That's why your league was better than the other league. And you know, as an A's fan, um, I got to enjoy Ray Fosse as a commentator for many years until he passed. And you know, he talked a lot about that play because it was constantly talked about as far as you know, if anybody even came close to hitting 3,000 hits, you know, he would always bring up Pete Rose himself. And, you know, he either tongue in cheek or, you know, trying to say the right thing, he would always say that, you know, yeah, he wishes he didn't do that. But at the same time, he knew that's how Rose played.
Yep.
And the reason why he got as many hits as he did, the reasons why he played for as long as he did. And I'll tell you what, not only did he run and play like you think about a Bryce Harper and his style of play, and you know the reckless abandon of him like slamming into things and walls and running and busting ass down the field. Um, but he also was one of the first to really adopt as a way of doing it the head first slide, which we all know leads to a lot of injuries now, right? So you see that and you see how he affected the game by being able to control those slides and get around those tags, and increase his mobility by doing so. And, you know, how that affected the guy I talked a lot about last episode, which was Ricky Henderson. And, you know, without that head first slide, which he did the majority of the time, um, really was something that I think later lasting impact. You know, him, you know, betting while he was a manager, awful. You know, that ruins the integrity of everything else. Prior to that, I agree with you, Matt. You know, the
As far
guys,
as I'm concerned.
yeah, he should have his own wing.
You know, and he played in 6 World Series. He won 3 of them.
Yeah.
You know, everything he could have accomplished in baseball, he did. You know, and nobody was really in his stratosphere in terms of, you know, he won an MVP. He won an MVP of the World Series. I think, you know, not that this is big, but 17 All-Star games. You know, and it's not an accident that he left the Reds and within 2 years he won the Phillies' first ever world championship. They were in existence for 100 years at that point. It's not an accident, you know. So, and then they went back to the World Series 3 years later. So yeah, it was he's a big topic, Pete Rose. He really is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we certainly have more to talk about with him, Mr. Rolo.
Yeah. I'll just leave it at he is obviously one of the greatest hitters who ever lived. I think the way he played the game, from all I've surmised and clips and things I've read about him, is the way. And I remember actually that being one of the few things positive that my dad would say about him from that All-Star game incident, was that he was playing hard. That's what he always did. He played hard, and that's what you want your ball players to do. So, so, so that was something that I remember my dad wasn't even, all that kind of miffed about like others, I guess, have been over the years. But I consider the gambling on the sport to be it, I think it's far surpasses doing steroids as far as being a disqualifier for getting into the Hall of Fame. Now, am I going to lose sleep if he gets in? No. And as a matter of fact, I would kind of relish the irony of him griping about not being in the Hall of Fame for his entire life, and then he gets in posthumously. I would find that kind of humorous, but uh, uh, um, I just I think it's one of those things that, like, the ripple effect. Like when I start playing out, they're like, "Oh, but he was betting on his team, so why would he?" But if he's once you enter that variable into the sport, you like it so quickly erodes any credibility to everything else. And it's why, not to jump sports here, but it's why David Stern needed to squash the Tim Donaghy thing and and consider it a rogue ref as quickly as possible, even though there are indications that other refs were in on it, particularly Scott Foster and that whole um, scandal from the NBA. Um, it turns it into, a potential mockery. So not to mention the fact that, he seemed to be just kind of a dink for his entire, for his entire post-game career. I feel like only recently it felt like there was some kind of contrition coming from him. But the fact that he and Ty Cobb are numbers 1 and 2, makes me wonder. I'm like, do you have to be like a next level a-hole to be that like superior at an athletic skill like that, to kind of be that single-mindedly driven at being the best at something?
Couple thoughts.
Yeah.
One, I think to be single-mindedly driven on anything, if you're going to be that good,
Mm.
you probably have some sort of personality, because to dedicate your life to that
Mhm.
amount of perfection in what
Yep.
you do, yeah, right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think about, we're all in mental health. Um, some of the most brilliant minds that we can come across have some sort of mental health disorder that aids them in some ways, and allows them to do some pretty incredible things. The other piece of this too, and I'll tell you what, Rolo, I'm kind of looking forward to our Hall of Fame chit chat about the betting and steroids, and how
Mhm.
that impacts. So uh, I'm really looking forward to that. I will tell you this though, I am not surprised that Red Sox fans who have been influenced by folks who were around during the Big Red Machine and that famous World Series that you all went home for, have a little bit of problem with Pete Rose. And
Fair point.
I bet you're not a big fan of Joe Morgan either, which
Well,
I have to agree. Joe Morgan was annoying, but
he was also a snooze as a color commentator
in,
too.
in
Oh,
that,
it's
that's why I
terrible.
didn't like him, because I
Yeah,
never
yeah.
really got to see him play. I know he was an amazing player, but but I will tell you this: from what I gather from a guy like Pete Rose, if he was on your team, you probably loved him because
Mhm.
he went to bat for you every time, and there probably wasn't even a thought of of a lack of loyalty from him, right? Um, but if you played against him, you probably hated his ass, right? And I'll tell you what, when we think about guys with personality flaws and how that may have affected them going into the Hall of Fame, the Jeff Kents, the obviously
Like,
Barry Bonds, but you have also the steroids cloud with Barry. Um, but those guys I think would have struggled anyway, right? Pete was one of those guys where, yeah, he's an asshole, right? Was he Ty Cobb, a racist prick who was, spiking everybody?
Mm. Not at that level.
You know, but at the same time, I can't tell you how many people I think I would hate, personality wise. Um, but I respect the job that they get to do. You know,
Mm.
I think about that too with politics. Some of these people are assholes, and I'd probably never get along with in my life. But you know what? I'm not hiring them for their politics.
right.
I mean, sorry, for the personality. I'm
Mm.
hiring them for what they're good at. You know, I don't care about Elon Musk, and I don't have to have a personal conversation with the guy, but he can make an electric car. And I can't do that, so he has a purpose.
Yeah, there's nobody I hate more than Roger Clemens. Well, there's a few people, not many.
Yeah,
But I would vote him in
yeah.
uh, just because he had Hall of Fame numbers and he was a Hall of Fame player. Same with Barry Bonds. A lot of players did steroids, but they weren't as good as Barry Bonds or Roger Clemens. So, that's kind of the way I look at that. The other thing that I saw about Pete Rose was um, when he was managing, he built that team that won the 1990 World Series. That was a lot of guys that he brought in and developed from the minor leagues, the Paul O'Neills, the Barry Larkins, um, those guys, Billy Hatcher. I don't know whether Billy Hatcher, well, he must have come from the Astros, but, he built that team that won the World Series after he was banned, like a year after he was banned. So it was interesting. He's an interesting character, complex kind of character. Um, yeah, you probably, well, you know, I think you probably remember Greco, the fight he got into with Buddy Harrelson in the playoffs against the Mets that one year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember his hair flopping around as he ran out of the dugout.
So he's an interesting guy, but it sounds like you're more of a traditionalist, Quinn.
Yeah, but you know what? Greco may have unearthed heretofore un uh
Bias.
unobserved little piece of truth about my dad's bias against him. I think my dad was a principled man, and so I think that obviously factored into his belief that that the lifetime ban was absolutely necessary. But my dad was living in Boston at the time of that World Series, and so I'm sure he didn't take kindly to the fact that the Reds ended up beating us when we were, so close. The iconic Fisk, get over, and the fact that we still weren't able to get it, and my dad had to wait another 30 years almost to to actually win one. Probably maybe factored into his disdain for people.
And I'll tell you what, I'm only saying this, excuse me, from lived experience, because my mother was basically a baseball historian, particularly with the damn Red Sox,
Mm.
and I got to hear a lot of vitriol spewed about those damn big red machine and their parts, to the point where when my team lost to the Reds, the Marge Schott led Reds in the 1990s, it
Yeah.
was it followed that same kind of, the Chris Sabos and those types where, there was a little bit of a controversy around Miss Marshot herself,
Yeah.
which led to the same kind of personality flaws that a lot of people attributed to Mr. Rose. So, yeah.
Definitely, I imagine Pete Rose will come up more as we get into other discussions in future episodes, particularly the Hall of Fame one.
Absolutely. Yeah. So another thing that came up this week was, and this is more of a quick hitter, I think, but those damn jerseys and pants, and I know, Mr. Taylor, you were kind of introduced to them tonight. The season started off with a lot of salt, particularly at Fanatics and Nike, with this stuff. And I'll tell you what, those jerseys were awful, and those pants were see through. One of the wonderful things about, being able to play, for a team, or even root for a team, is that they look good on the screen, right? They look good, they look legit. Tell me another sport where the manager or the coach dresses in uniform for the game, right? This is a particular thing where, I really do believe that the baseball uniform in some ways is sacred. And for lack of a better term, they turned them into, polyester.
Laughing stock.
Yeah. I mean, it looks awful. So I'm happy to hear that they're going to go back um, to the old way of making these things. I don't know if it's actually going to happen next year, but it's going to go, at least by 2026. I think their uniforms come back. Little quick thing too about that we didn't talk about, and this is how I found out about it, is I was intrigued by an article I saw. The damn All-Star game, right? Talking about an All-Star game that actually doesn't mean anything. Um, I think it even means less when they're not wearing their team uniform during the game anymore.
I agree.
Right? And one of those things that's happening, and this was the article, this was the headline I saw: MLB to reintroduce All-Star players during the actual All-Star game wearing their jerseys from their team that they represent.
Good.
And I think it's about damn time that came back.
Yeah.
I mean, it hasn't been long, but it reminded me of like the 2000s and the 99s of those shitty uniforms where, you had the Colorado Rockies wearing sleeveless, shirts, and, looking like a beer league softball. Yeah. So.
Yeah, they got to get back to the more regal baseball uniforms. And, I mean, they just look cheap, and it just really does reek of trying to save money or find cheaper materials to skim off the top. For instance, not only because of how they looked, but also because of the lack of like recognition of the fact that the pants were see-through. Like, was there no one in charge of quality control to be like, oh shit, this doesn't hide this doesn't effectively hide all the players' thunder down under. And that's gonna scandalize some poor young viewers if they're having to watch this. Like, what the hell? I mean, someone's got to be paying attention to that, but they probably didn't have that because they're like, oh, well, we saved this much money, so they'll be fine.
Well, this is what happens too when you allow one vendor or one company to do the uniforms, and you don't want to, send it out to multiple ones that could do a better job. MLB loves monopolies, so the one I always think of in terms of, I don't know if this is uniforms, but I know, I remember in the Cape League, a lot of the Cape League teams had to change their names, because MLB wanted to cut of, that like the Mets, the Hyannis Mets used to be there. Now they're the Harbor Hawks. The Orleans Cardinals are now the Firebirds. The Chatham A's are now the Anglers. Um, MLB wanted a cut from those teams in their merchandise. So those teams had to switch their names. So this is what happens when, you have a monopoly that wants, that's only interested in making money and not a quality product.
I wonder if they're going to come after us. The team that I coach is the Leominster Dodgers. I wonder if we're going to get the cease and desist shortly after this. Yeah. All right. So the next thing that came up this week was the playoffs.
Playoffs.
We had a pretty chaotic last few days of the season, right? You went from having the worst team in the league, confirmed that recently. You also had, some of the best players, help wheel their teams into the playoffs. And then you also had a team that had to kind of scrape their way into the playoffs without half of their best roster, right? The Atlanta Braves, and that game with, those games with the Mets, which were affected by Hurricane Helene. Some crazy last minute baseball. And that almost gave me kind of that one game plan that you were talking about before, that the vibe for those two games.
Especially that first game that, was wild back and forth, and just the energy of going into it, because the Mets had to win one of them. I think the scenario was that if the Braves ended up sweeping, the Mets would be out, right? And who was the team that would have gone in instead?
Arizona.
Right.
Yeah, and vice
Who
versa.
freaking cares? Aside from Arizona taking out the Yankees in 2001, I am bored to tears by Arizona. So I'd rather have the Mets in there.
World Series team last year.
Yep.
I know, but what's the personality of any team in Arizona?
Okay. All right. Okay. Same with Vegas. All right. So
Yep.
Now the interesting thing though was that the Braves needed to win one too. I mean, everybody was tied, and it seemed like nobody wanted to lose that first game, but also nobody wanted to win that first game. I mean, it was pretty chaotic.
Yeah, I didn't see it, but I heard Chris Russo lose his shit when Lindor hit a home run.
Yeah.
The only question I had is that it was a 3-way tie. Did Arizona lose the head-to-head? What was the tiebreaker?
Yeah, so I think usually the tiebreaker is head-to-head record. And then it goes to against that division. So if particularly your own division, especially if your own division. So say the Yankees and Red Sox split the series, right? But the Red Sox won more games against collectively their total division than it would be the other tiebreaker. I don't know if it got that minute for Arizona, if they actually had to do the tiebreaker against that division. But I know that that's the next one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I just find it obnoxious that 86 games got you into the playoffs in the American League, and the Red Sox couldn't even pass that low bar to get in.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what. If you said in the beginning of the year which division in the American League was going to have 3 teams representing, I would not have said the American League Central.
Yeah.
They almost had 4.
Yeah, they did. They really did. Yeah. They really did. I mean, it helps playing Chicago that many times,
Yep.
right? But again, only 86 wins. It's not a lot.
Didn't Detroit sell at the trading deadline too? Didn't they
Yeah,
sell
yeah,
some of
they were pretty much out.
like what the hell? And AJ Hinch is coaching them now, right?
Yeah, yeah, he's been. Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you what. The funny thing about them is that I was actually watching a video about the end of the season today, and I think the percentage of them actually the chance of them winning, it was even like a month or so ago, was like 2% chance to get into the playoffs, and they rode a horse. I mean, see with the Mets. The Mets did the same thing. You know who? Jose Iglesias, right? Your old buddy,
Oh yeah.
started singing, right? Made a music video, started singing to them in the beginning as his walk up, right? And then did you hear about that? I mean, it's
No,
like
I did not.
he's got one of the biggest songs worldwide right now as a Latin pop star. Check it
What?
out. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And then Grimace
Wow.
went Grimace went, and I think he threw the first pitch or something. And they went on a 7-game win streak after that. And that's why you see Grimace all the time. They even have a purple seat in that stadium.
Wow.
They
Wow. I
weren't
did
supposed
not
to
know
do
that
anything.
either.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
so tapped into to all the goings on and the lore of all these different teams, Greco.
Yeah.
You know why? My team's not the home team.
Mm.
And so I don't get to listen
So
to
that
all the
makes you
local
more
media.
worldly. He has a
I
more
don't listen to
worldly
all the
watcher.
local media.
Mm.
I don't have to,
Right.
right? So I listen to the national level.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah, Taylor, what do you think of the teams that are in? Any surprises for you?
Uh, Definitely Detroit. They must have got in because of that guy. What's his name? Kubel
Oh yeah.
was a pitcher.
He's the one that's Cy Young. Didn't he and sorry to interrupt, Matt, but he and Sale both respectively got the triple crowns, the pitching triple crowns
Wow.
this season, I think.
Mhm.
Which I think is only this I read only the second time that's happened in the last 100 years. The only other time in 100 years that's happened was when Clayton Kershaw and Justin Verlander did it back in like 2011 or something.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, not to you brought up Chris Sale, and I'd be remiss. Chris Sale was supposed to pitch that second game
Mhm.
in that playoff in a half hour before the game, because of tightness, I think, in his hamstring or something. He couldn't go. And so they told the guy, I don't even remember his name, that ended up starting. They told him a half hour before the game. He had to stop eating lunch, get ready, and he already pitched the game before.
Oh, jeez.
Wow.
I didn't know that. Wow.
And he dealt.
How
So I'm
many
sorry.
innings did he go?
I think 3 or 4. I'll look it up. Go ahead,
I-
Mr. Taylor.
I think Kansas City is a dangerous team. Um, you know, I was surprised at how inept the Orioles were at the end of the year, and they didn't score today. So, the Orioles have always been my de facto team. Aside from the Red Sox, because I have relatives down there, and I've been watching them most of my life, and they just became good again. But I don't know what's happened to them this year. They certainly weren't where they were last year. They're still young though.
Yeah, they're going to be good for a while.
It was interesting because, when you look at the 3 teams for that final wild card spot. So I heard this the other day. Well, I know Pete Alonso is going to be a free agent. I would love for the Red Sox to get him. I know they're not going to get him because they're cheap and they suck.
Yep.
The other guy I would like to see them get plays for the Diamondbacks. He's a Gold Glove first baseman, and he can hit 30 home runs and drive in 100 runs. Christian Walker. I'd love to see the Red Sox get him. They probably won't get him either. But I mean, they've had the worst defensive first baseman like over the last 5 years. and now you have
It's like
two.
they've completely neglected that position. It's
Yeah.
aggravating.
Yep. So, the American League is completely wide open. Completely wide open. The Yankees won the American League with 94 wins.
Mm.
When have we ever seen that? And what a wasted opportunity for the Red Sox, right?
That used to be the wild card number. Like I feel like
Yeah.
not, like the Sox have, back when there was only one wild card, the Sox would have to sneak in with a wild card number of like 94 wins back in the heyday.
Yep. Yep. And and then you have Cleveland, who I know very little about. And then Kansas City and Detroit, and then so you have Kansas City, Detroit, Cleveland, Houston, the Yankees, and the Orioles. So I don't think you could vote Houston out of anything.
Yeah, they're a playoff team. The way they're built, they're a playoff team.
Yeah, you can tell they must just get kind of bored maybe during the regular season because they've been so postseason tested over the last several years that it's almost like they have to wait for that to get up and then start playing at their ceiling.
Yeah.
They just reload every year. They built a good core, a great core of players like Bregman and Altuve and now Alvarez. They had Correa before, and they had Garrett Cole for a while, and all these players, and they just reload with different people.
Yeah, I mean Verlander, Pena.
Yeah,
that
Jeremy
dude's a
Pena,
beast. Yeah, he's a beast. Bregman may be gone. This may be his last year there, depending on what happens. But they seem to retool, every year, which is bad for my team and my division, but good for baseball. I mean, I hate them because of the trash throw stuff too, right? But at the same time, good for them. And there's individual players that I absolutely like, and Payne is one of them. I'll tell you what, though, Cleveland, man, I believe in Stephen Vogt.
Oh, that's right. That's right. I forgot about that. Yeah.
I don't know anything about them. The one thing I will say is everybody talks about around here about the Red Sox doing the Tampa model, or the way you build a team is a Tampa model. Well, Tampa hasn't won shit. And, there's no buzz around that team, and there never has been. And if you look across the league now, you look at all these teams, Kansas City, Cleveland, Detroit, you can even put the Orioles in that category. They're all better at it than you are. And you don't even need to do it. So that was part of my frustration of calling into that radio show last night. So, I respect all the teams in there that they went out and they got young players that could actually make a difference, and then surround the team with different pieces that can work.
Listen, Chaim Bloom may have set you up because you do have some pretty decent young kids coming. You do. I mean, just Dick Fitz is going to be a wonderful addition to any game. But you also now have Craig Breslow, who is brilliant, by the way, and came up as a reliever for my team. So I have a little love for the boy.
Yeah, I remember he pitched for the Sox too.
Yeah, he went from my boys to you.
He talks like a freaking automaton, though. Do all these people just go to the same school of learning how to speak like a freaking dweeb? It's so aggravating to hear so many of these GM bots talk, and there's no feel for anything. It's all sabermetrics. It's all statistics, and it's like, can't you talk a little bit more like a regular person, just a little bit? Because we are talking about human beings here, and not only that play the sport, but that also and more importantly, as like a PR person, kind of like a figurehead, which that's part of the role of a GM, at least a little bit. Like you're speaking to people. Like, why do you have to deliberately aggravate so many of the fans themselves who want to enjoy the game, and instead you're just just nerding it up and making us feel stupid because we want to have like big time players on our team. Well, you don't really understand the numbers behind these players, and there's a more efficient way to build a team. It's it's irritating, and I blame the Rays, and I also kind of blame the A's for
No,
this
no,
whole mindset.
no. You shouldn't kind of blame the A's. You should 100% blame the A's. And you know what? You should also blame the A's for 2004, 2007, 2013. Because I will, oh, and sorry, 2005, right? I will
That
tell you. What's that?
doesn't
Was it only three?
Or
well,
It was four.
I mean, do you count 2018?
Oh, yeah, okay. Well, kind of, right? So listen, here's the deal. You
Yeah.
hired somebody. You hired Theo Epstein, right? Theo Epstein was a sabermetrics guy.
Mm-hmm.
Theo Epstein was recommended by another sabermetrics guy named Billy Bean because Billy Bean didn't go to you guys. So he said, you know what, you can't have me, but there's this other guy I know. And not only that, you also hired the guy who wrote the book that guided the Oakland A's
Bill
into the
James.
Moneyball season. Yeah, Bill
Oh.
James.
Mm-hmm.
You guys, your little weed nerd stuff, and believe me, I hate it because I think there's a human element. I think clutch is a real thing. I think that personality is a real. I think team chemistry is a real thing. But I'll tell you what, those guys will tell you no, and it won your World Series. So you either take the good and you take the bad with it.
It helped. It helped win us a World Series in conjunction with our checkbook when we actually back when we paid players.
100%. Because I'll tell you what, those guys that we picked that were sabermetrics guys, the Johnny Damons, the Isringhausens, the Giambis, the who else did you take from us over the years?
Euclid, technically, right? Wasn't
Yeah,
Euclid in your system?
Yeah. Well, you was drafted by us, and he was a
Greek god of walks. Yeah,
a Greek god of walks. He was a huge target, but you guys grabbed him before us. I mean, those are the players that you ended up overpaying that we had that we took in.
Keith Folk too, right?
Yeah, Keith Folk. Yes, that was another guy I was trying to think of. Right. Yeah. Those are the guys that the way Moneyball worked was you tried to find inefficiencies in the market. Nobody was paying for walks back then. Nobody was paying for on base percentage. Yeah, would they have rather had the guys who could hit all the home runs and hit for a high average and do all this stuff? Yeah, but they couldn't afford those guys. And so they went after the guys who didn't strike out a lot. They went after the guys who could walk. And those are the guys that they underpaid until they couldn't afford them anymore. And then they said, oh, you know what? Now, what Moneyball isn't necessarily the high on base percentage guys because those are the guys who are getting paid, right? Now, Moneyball is good defense, strong pitching, and athletic guys, fast. Right? If you look at the A's now, they're a much more athletic team. They don't have a lot of the Jack Cuss that looked like Babe Ruth or the Billy Butlers coming through, on a big contract, right? They have a lot of the guys that are a little bit quicker and nimble because nobody's paying them anymore, right?
Well, when I look at that first championship, I remember what Theo did in terms of he used sabermetrics to build the bullpen. Mm-hmm. So they had those, they called it the bullpen by committee at the time. And what happened was it cost them a lot of games that year in the regular season They had that was one of their best offensive teams ever, that 2003 team. And then in the playoffs, they had the spare parts pitched well. But the reason Grady Little left Pedro in the game is because they had nobody to close out the game. So, he threw, I don't know, like 120, 125 pitches in that game. And he didn't, he had Alan Embry and Mike Timlin, who weren't closers, pitching behind him. So they really didn't have that shutdown closer to end that game in Game 7. So it cost them. So then the next year they went out and got Keith Foulke, and the two most important pieces of that team were Keith Foulke and Curt Schilling, the two biggest additions to that team, those two additions right there. And you could argue that those are maybe two of the 3 or 4 most important members of that team in terms of winning, putting them over the top.
You're welcome.
So, yeah. And think about that. Foulke, I think, pitched he pitched a lot of innings that year. He was never the same after that.
No.
Because
we turned on him fast.
Yeah, it was all high stress innings, a lot of innings.
Does.
Yeah. And you look at those high stress innings and things like that. Sabermetricians, they don't understand any of that. They don't understand any of that. So, I don't know. It enrages me that. And then, the other thing I was going to mention too is they think that anybody could just play anywhere, right? You look at the Red Sox, they have Rafaela playing shortstop. They have him playing center field. They have, all these guys playing first base, and they wonder why they have such terrible defense. And, they've given up the most unearned runs in baseball. And they don't realize on top of that it makes all these pitchers throw more pitches and go shorter amounts of innings. It's all a domino effect. And, again, the sabermetricians, they don't get it. They don't get it. That's why I don't respect it.
I will tell you what, and I think we get to at least close out this one and start the next one. Because listen, 2024 playoffs, right? Let's talk about the Red Sox, 20 years ago. Well, here's the deal, right? When you think about the way that team was built and the team that's built right now for the Red Sox, you're talking about some of the more, I guess, common problems that other teams in the league face is not being able to keep your key guys, making mistakes that historically haven't been made in a long time for Boston.
Yep.
Right? Not being able, I would contend with that phrasing. I would say not being willing to keep key guys, because John Henry is able, if he can buy these different sports franchises that he keeps buying, and networks and newspapers, he can afford the players that should belong in a market like Boston. He's just choosing not to, because he's putting way too much emphasis now on sabermetrics. And as far as I firmly believe that they should be decision informing, not decision making, in terms of how to use sabermetrics, because it's not like either or. Decision informing, not decision making.
I like that.
And I just don't understand why it's so difficult, and why the Red Sox, and that's where Theo, I thought, was brilliant. He seemed like he was more weighted on the sabermetric side of things, because he was one of the earliest ones to do it after Billy Beane. But now in retrospect, he was like a, he was miles compared to the rest of these nerds that are running these teams now. And he himself has even been the one that's kind of saying, like, hey, we need to like swing the pendulum a little bit back more to like the human element of the game. And just hope the Red Sox can follow suit at some point.
Yeah, I'll tell you what. and maybe this is another little discussion about the end of the season, but one of the biggest changes so far was Farhan Zaidi getting the boot in San Francisco and Buster Posey now being the president of baseball. And what that does as far as the sabermetrics thing, bringing players now who understand and have had that chemistry and have that personality as part of the way things go. And it was a couple weeks ago when they shored up Matt Chapman for 6 years and they reached an extension with him. It was Posey before even accepting this position who announced that move and the optics of that for other players and what that looks like as far as free agency goes. And people finding San Francisco maybe desirable because of who's sitting at the helm.
Wild to me that he's already in that position. I'm like, wasn't he just playing? Yeah,
Yeah,
that's crazy.
he was a hell of a player.
Yeah, it was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, all right, gentlemen, I think we should call this one a wrap. And I think just by virtue of the fact that I think we've gone at least 40 minutes, that we hit the next one. All
We
right.
got. I'm gonna just load up more in the tank to talk about the A's in the Coliseum. I'll tell you what, I got some thoughts.
Yeah. So, spoiler alert, next episode, the demise of Oakland baseball.